Hey, everybody. I hope you can hear me. So hopefully that's happening. Welcome to kandorwithkaty. Tonight's going to be kind of silly, a little bit fun. I'm always making sure that things are going well. Can you hear me? You can. Okay. I'm using my earpods, whatever the heck it's called tonight. So we're gonna get started. Did you like my little shamrock thing I had back there? We're gonna talk about, are leprechauns real? And I have a story to read, so I have to ask you a question. Should I read the whole thing, or should I read half of it next week? I think it'll take about 20 minutes. I'm not reading the Washington Irving one tonight, at least. Maybe next week. I think that's something I would probably rather memorize a little bit more and then read because of the way it's written. But this is a story out of this book. I've not been able to find this book for years, you guys. And I used to use it in my classrooms and stuff. And so really cool, you know? Okay, so are leprechauns real? There are some things that you might not know about leprechauns. Did I actually, hang on a second. I think I might have forgotten to put this on my thing. There's like 15 things that you didn't know about leprechauns. Give me 2 seconds here because I'm going to paste it in here so that I can actually talk to you about it. Where did I go? Oops, that's not what I meant to do. I'm always having some kind of technical difficulty, aren't I? All right, paste. Let's see if it's updated in here for me. Not yet. I swear it's not me if there's some kind of technical difficulties, right? This is so much fun watching me. It's not updated. God dang it. All right, well, here's 15 things you didn't know about leprechauns. So let's just talk about that. Okay. One, let me find what this is. I think it's from Mental Floss, which is really cool. Let me just put that in there. How's everybody doing tonight, by the way? Are you ready for St. Patrick's Day? Didn't COVID happen last year, like right at this time? And in my memory, I think it's like the shutdown happened on. There we go. Here it is. Okay. The shutdown happened on St. Patrick's Day, didn't it? Like, I feel like everybody was out in the bars and they were like, okay, suddenly everybody has to be out home and by like 8 o'clock or something. So here's some things that you didn't know about leprechauns. They're fairies. Did you know that? My friend Jason Ryan, he said they're not little people, they're fairies. So it says, although they might not match your initial idea of what a fairy is, can you hear that noise? Leprechauns are considered a part of the family. Like other fairies, they're small in size and prone to mischief. Okay? So they are a group of magical beings that served under the Gaelic goddess Danu. Like, how interesting is that? Next, there aren't any female leprechauns. That's something I never actually thought about. As a way of explaining why there is no record of female leprechauns, and therefore no way to procreate in the traditional sense, some sources claim leprechauns are the unwanted children of the fairy community. Sad. As a result, they're described as grouchy, untrusting, and solitary creatures. Okay, next one. There's a leprechaun colony in Portland, Oregon. What? Okay, so I'm going to share the screen here and show you the picture. This is what comes from it. This is like the description of this, okay? So I'll take this off. After noticing a small circular hole in concrete where a light pole was meant to be, a journalist named Dick Fagan took it upon himself to make use. After adding flowers and a tiny sign that proclaimed it the world's smallest park, Fagan began to write stories about the spot in a newspaper column, and he decided the adventures of a small leprechaun colony led by a leader that only the journalist could see. The modest garden called Mill Ends Park became an official city park on St. Patrick's Day in 1976. It's a long time ago. So contributors over the years have added miniature additions like a swimming pool, complete with a diving board. So I think that's kind of fun. And I'm hoping that people can comment tonight too, because I had that snafu last week with Al, but that was because we had some kind of thing with scheduling it, I think. Okay, so the next one is there's a leprechaun. Oh wait, oops, I already talked about that one. Leprechaun means small body. It's just believed to be a variation of the Middle Irish word, which I cannot pronounce. If Jason Ryan was on here, he could announce it, which means small body. Okay, woo. That's getting technical for you, okay? Here's the next one. Whoops. Sometimes leprechauns are red. Although Little Irishmen are now synonymous with the color green, they weren't always. Early accounts of the leprechauns described them as wearing red and spotting a variety of hats, often three-cornered, which is going to come in the story later. Can someone comment, please, just so that I can see that people can comment? Because it's freaking me out because it messed up last week. And I did my podcast with my lender on our check this out, but it's not working. So if anybody's watching, if you could please just make a comment in there. I don't care what it is. That would be swell. Okay, the next one is leprechauns have a troublesome cousin. Now, I hope I pronounced this right, too, called the clurichaun. Also sporting red is the ambitious clurichaun, a mythical creature that shares many characteristics with the leprechaun. These beings are always described as drunk and surly. They're often seen in stories riding animals at night or clearing out entire wine cellars. Some accounts explain these troublemakers as the night form of leprechauns. After a hard day's work, the bearded fairies get so tipsy, they become an entirely different species. So others describe them as closely related to the leprechaun. I don't see any comments yet. Can someone comment, please? Just do me a favor. Okay, the next one is leprechauns are the bankers and cobblers of the fairy world. Kind of makes sense, right? They're known for their money, and there's apparently a lot of it in the cobbling business. Since they spend most of their time alone, the tiny green men pour all their energy into crafting shoes. Dun, dun, dun. They're said to always have a hammer and shoe in hand, and according to legend, you can hear their coming by the telltale tapping sound they make. That's kind of cool. This you always knew. I'm going to ask again if somebody could comment. Comment, please. Leprechauns are sneaky. Wherever there are leprechauns, there are stories of people trying to steal their gold. The rule is, if you're lucky enough to catch a leprechaun, you can never take your eyes off of him or he'll disappear. In one tale, a man managed to catch a leprechaun and forced the fairy to divulge the secret location of his treasure. The leprechaun reluctantly pointed to a tree. Delighted, the man tied a red bandana around the branch and ran home to get a shovel. What do you think the leprechaun did? When the man returned, he was dismayed to find all the trees were sporting the same red scarf. Sneaky, sneaky. Again, I'm going to ask, could someone please comment? I don't know if I can see your comments. Another, leprechauns can be generous if you're kind to them. Constantly being chased for one's gold or cereal, can take a toll on any fairy's demeanor. As a result, leprechauns are distrustful and secretive. This attitude doesn't mean they won't lose the purse strings if touched by a bit of kindness, however. One legend mentions a down-on-his-luck nobleman who offered a leprechaun a ride on his horse. In return, the man returned to his crumbling castle to find it filled to the ceiling with gold. Yes, please. Again, could someone please comment? I'm going to keep saying it until someone does, but maybe you guys aren't watching. Who knows? Here's the next one. Someone claims to have found the remains of an actual leprechaun. This is true. All right. In 1989, a local businessman in Claringford, Ireland, claimed to have found evidence of a real leprechaun on a mountain called, no idea how to pronounce it. I will have to put it in the comments. Slieve Foy, which I'm totally butchering, I'm sure. He said that after hearing a scream near the wishing well, he found bones, a tiny suit, and gold coins near scorched earth. The evidence is now displayed behind a glass case for visitors to come see. So there's people that really think they're out there, kind of like Sasquatch. Leprechauns are protected under European law. Supposedly there are 236 leprechauns that still live in the caverns of the Slieve Foyer, which I'm saying wrong, I'm sure. In 2009, the EU granted heritage status to the remaining wee people. They now have their own protected sanctuary nestled in the mountain. Okay, this is interesting because I talked about this on my other podcast with my lender, and they're in Oklahoma. They're trying to create a hunting season for Sasquatch. So it's kind of funny that they're doing that. And I'm going to ask again, could someone make a comment? Because I'm not seeing any. All right. Maybe you don't care. Like I said. Okay. Some accounts say leprechauns can live underwater, which is super strange. The earliest known folktale to feature a leprechaun comes from the Middle Ages. That's a long time ago. In it, the king of Ulster falls asleep by the beach, and he awakens to find 3 little bodies attempting to drag him into the undersea layer. He captures them, but releases them after he's promised 3 wishes. And this story suggests that mythical men are sea dwellers. The mythical men are sea dwellers. Okay, but not a lot of people like that one. Okay, leprechauns might have a divine heritage. Some sources say they are derivatives of the Irish deity Lugh, no idea how to say that, god of the sun and of arts and crafts. After the rise of Christianity, Lugh's importance was diminished, and he was demoted to a shoemaker. Shoemaking folklore character known as Lugh Cromane, which maybe is the distant cousin of the leprechaun. You can pretend to be a leprechaun for a good cause. Did you know that? In March, there are marathons all over the country, and there's festive runners help raise money for charity while getting in the St. Patrick's Day spirit. There's probably a whole bunch of them that do that, you know? Okay, and then you can make your own leprechaun trap, and I'm taking it from this article that I got from Mental Floss. It's really cute. You could do something like this. So maybe I'll do something like this on Candor with Katy next week. Look how cute that is. Little ladder, and there's crackers under the pot, under the rainbow. So that's something you can do. Fun, fun, fun. And then that's it. That was 15 things that you might not have known about leprechauns. And then I have one other thing that's kind of interesting. It is a spooky. Spooky. Are you ready? Again, I'm going to ask someone to comment. I guess you guys can't comment. Maybe I'm asking and you can't comment. So that really sucks because I would really like to see your comments. So comment if you can. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. This is, let me find it. This is a castle in Ireland. Super interesting. It's haunted. And you can buy this for, it's $2.5 million, I think. Ooh. Here it is. Okay. Look how cool this place is. It's like huge. It kind of reminds me, well, you'll see another picture in a minute. It kind of reminds me of Downton Abbey. All right. The most haunted house in Ireland where the devil himself is said to have lived, or said to have visited, has gone up for sale. Loftus Hall in Fethard-on-Sea, County Wexford, is rumored to be the site of numerous ghostly goings. Ghostly going is on and has been used as an after-dark tourist attraction since 2012. So not that long ago. Now paranormal enthusiasts have the opportunity to own the vast 22-bedroom mansion as it's being sold by owners Aidan and Shane Quigley. Photos show that the property's impressive Georgian architecture and stunning landscape grounds. So this is another picture from far away. And if you are watching and you can, please comment so that I know I can see your comments. This is so bizarre that I have to keep asking this, but after last week, I don't want to chance it. Okay, look at that. That's where it looks like Downton Abbey. So it's so far away. So inside, so it shows the impressive landscape grounds here. Look at that. So inside, the once opulent interiors have now faded, given the stately home an eerie feel. But here's the story. Among the peeling wallpaper and decaying paneling, though, are glimpses of its former glory. The property's spooky history dates back to 1766. Oh my God, I can stop asking for comments now. I have a comment. Hello, Regina. Thank you so much for abiding me. The couple, okay, so one night, a mysterious the property's spooky history, dates back to 1766 when it was known as Redmond Hall. And I have a friend named Marnie Fireball Redmond. And I think this is probably her family's history. Hello, Danae. Thank you for commenting. I'm just going to say that. One night, a mysterious guest came calling on the home's owners, Lord and Lady Tottenham and their daughter, Lady Anne. The couple invited the gentleman in to shelter from a storm that was raging outside. Legend has it that during a game of cards, Lady Anne bent down to retrieve a fallen card, only to find that their guest had the cloven hooves of the devil. All right. Lady Anne let out a blood-curdling scream, and the satanic guest is said to have disappeared in a puff of smoke. Anne apparently went into a state of shock and madness and was locked away in a tapestry room, dying not long afterwards. Her death was no release, though, as servants and her family reported seeing her spirit roaming the halls for years to come. Today, the manor is used for ghost hunts and tours, and it has a string of film credentials, having featured in Horror Flick The Lodgers and many paranormal investigations. The site itself dates back to 1710, when a Norman knight built a castle on the ground, changing his name to Redmond and to fit in with his new Irish home. The Redmond family went on to build a hall to replace the castle following the Black Death. Since then, it has passed through the Redmond dynasty until the Loftus family took over in the 1650s. And it went on to become a school for the girls, and the former farmers have spent tens of thousands of pounds restoring it for their use in a 75-pound a night guest house. Their tours, or guest tours, sorry. Ghost tours! Oh my God, did I just learn how to read yesterday? Danae says, the thought of small men, leprechauns, scared the shit out of me. I should have shared the thing from Jennifer Aniston will never live down that leprechaun movie, you know? But they said of the ghostly atmosphere, many have said there are certain areas of the hall, its atmosphere, the temperature, and the general feeling of unease. Many people have seen things that have left them wondering. Okay, so here's the thing. 20 minutes in. It's going to take me about 20 minutes to read this story. It's going to be story time. Are you ready for it? Would you like me to read this story? You can tell me halfway through if you'd like me to stop and finish next week. But it's kind of fun. It's just something different, guys. We need to be positive, right? Okay, let me see if I created a cool banner for this. I probably did. Oh, the story is called The Shoemaker and Himself, and it's written by a guy named Michael Scott, but not the guy from The Office. Okay, so here's the story, and it's a simple one. It's one I could read to elementary kids and to high school kids. Okay, and I used to read it in an Irish accent, but I have too many Irish friends, so. I don't want to embarrass myself. You know what I'm saying? All right. So Sean Lane had always been a strange man. From the moment he was born, people said that there was something amiss with him. He was small and dark with a sharp pointed face and hard, bright eyes. When he was a young boy, he would often stop and stare at something that only he could see. And then he would turn to his brother or sister and say, "Did you not see the leprechaun? Or that was one of the fairy folk." Okay, comments. Ha ha ha. Okay, I hope that means you're happy with me reading. Of course, no one believed him. They all thought he was a strange little boy who used to tell lies. But the truth was that Sean could actually see the fairy folk. It looks like Sidhe, but it's pronounced she. The she and the leprechauns and the cluricons. And I hope I say this right. Fear Dirg, which means red man. And once he even saw the terrible banshee singing her terrifying lament outside a house to warn them of death. Okay, so there's lots of folklore. When he grew up, Sean decided he would be a shoemaker. His own grandfather was a cobbler and would be able to teach him how to make and mend shoes. And Sean, who was something of a lazy person, thought that cobbling would be an easy sort of a job. On summer days, he would be able to sit outside his cottage mending the shoes, and in winter, he'd be able to sit in front of a roaring fire. So Sean went and lived with his grandfather for 3 years, learning how to become a shoemaker. And in the end, when he thought he knew enough, he said goodbye to the old man and returned to his own village. I thought I could read without my glasses, but I can't. However, on his way home, Sean decided to take a shortcut across the marsh. It was dark and a dreary place, even on the hottest and brightest day, and the young shoemaker soon regretted his decision. The ground bubbled and steamed, and swarms of flies and midges buzzed around his head. Gross. Midges. That's that thing that Michael Dickens talked about in my interview with him. Like, he didn't like that. I think they burrow themselves into your skin. Once he stumbled off the narrow path and sank ankle deep into the thick, dirty water. He got such a fright that he decided to sit down and rest for a while before continuing across the marsh, which is like smelly and gross, as you know, right? It's like a swamp. Okay, but the day was a hot one, and Sean soon fell asleep with his head resting against an ancient tree stump. He awoke much later with a start, shivering with the evening chill. It took him a moment to realize where he was, and then he wondered what had awakened him. He lay still and listened. Oh, I have the sound here. I have the sound. Okay, good. And a small man appeared, right? Well, you'll see. You will see, Danae. And I hope you guys stick with me because this is just super fun to be silly and different and reading a story online. Here's the sound that he heard. Hope you can hear it. Let's see. Oh, the suspense. Can you hear that? What is that? Oh my goodness, it's so scary. So Danae says, oh, the suspense. I know. So he leaned and he heard nothing unusual, but then faint and almost lost in the buzzing and sucking and creaking noises of the marsh. He heard a thin metallic plinking sound. Sean sat up and listened carefully. The noise suddenly sounded very familiar. He turned his head slightly toward the sound, and then he suddenly recognized it. It was the sound of a shoemaker's hammer hitting a nail. Dun, dun, dun. I'm out of here. Okay, fine. I'm going to keep reading. But what would a shoemaker be doing in this part of the marsh? That's just strange. The noise was coming from ahead of him, and Sean made up his mind to investigate. On hands and knees, he crept down the path, heading toward the sound. The ringing noises grew louder as he neared it, and then Sean smelt the bittersweet odor of tobacco in the air. What do you think that is? Today says I'm going to have nightmares. You really won't. It's actually a good story. Okay, when the sound was coming from directly in front of him, Sean carefully raised his head and parted the thick blades of grass. Oh, yes, he did. He's a brave fella. He found he was staring directly at a leprechaun. The small man was sitting on a little mound of earth beneath the shade of a weeping willow tree, and Sean could see the black three-cornered hat, the dark green coat, and the corners of his bright red stockings. Sounds like a little Christmas leprechaun. Oh, good. Danae says, no, not going anywhere. Thank you for sticking with me. The young man could feel his heart beginning to pound. He had seen leprechauns a few times before, but only from a distance. They were very hard to catch, but if you managed to get a hold of one and not take your eyes off of him for even an instant, they would have to lead you to their hidden pots of gold. Pots of gold, it says here. Pots. However, they had 100 tricks for making sure that they cheated you, and there were very many stories about the little people escaping from the big folk, which is what they called humans. Oh, how original. But this one would not get away. Sean promised. He took a deep breath and he began to slide forward on the damp ground. The leprechaun should have heard the young man approaching, but it was a very hot day and he was so tired. He wasn't really paying attention. He heard nothing because he was tapping the shoe in his hand with his hammer and humming a little tune. Maybe it's Whistle While You Work, okay? So he got a terrible fright, and when someone grabbed him by the shoulders and shouted, "I've got you now, Mr. Leprechaun, and you won't cheat me," the leprechaun turned around and looked up at the big person. The big person, the leprechaun decided, really wasn't such a big person after all. Indeed, he was only a little bit bigger than himself. Sean looked at the leprechaun. Although he had the face and beard of an old man, his eyes were bright and lively, and he didn't really seem to be too worried about being caught. "I've got you now," Sean said, still holding the leprechaun by the shoulders in his green coat. "Ah, you have indeed," the leprechaun said quietly. "I won't let you go." The leprechaun shook his head. "No, I don't think you would. I didn't think you would. Now tell me, what do you want from me?" "What do you think he wanted? That's not very hard." Sean was a little surprised. Why wasn't the leprechaun frightened at being or angry at being captured? "I suppose you want my crock of gold," the leprechaun continued. "Well, it won't work because I haven't got one. I was captured last week by one of your people, and I had to give up my gold then, and the leprechaun can only have one pot of gold in a lifetime." "What?" So Danae says, "But he didn't have a pot of gold?" "No, and that's where this story takes a turn." How do I know you're telling me the truth?" Sean demanded. "Ah, sure. Why would I lie to you? The little people never lie," he says. "They may not always tell the full truth, but they can never tell you a lie." "Oh, so you've no gold?" the young man asked. "So not so much as the gold button," the leprechaun said pleasantly. "Nothing?" Sean asked. He was very disappointed. It was just his luck to get a hold of a leprechaun that someone else had caught before. This would be like if you won the lottery and it was like past the date, right? Or like that guy with the bitcoins that has like 220 million and he can't access it. That would suck, right? You catch a leprechaun, no pot of gold. Okay. "Not so much as a silver sixpence." "Nothing?" he asked again. "Not so much as a copper penny." "Well, what do you have?" Sean demanded. "I can't just let you go now, can I?" The old man tilted his head to one side and considered. No, I don't suppose you can. It wouldn't really be right if you just let me go. Why, what would the other little folks say if they knew I was caught and then just let go?" "No," he said again. "I'll either have to escape or pay you." "Well, you won't escape," Sean said. "You see, I have a little of the fairy blood in me. I'm what the country people call fae, which is, I think that's the fairy that people always talk about that comes into your house and like moves things around, steals things, and then it shows up later. Tell me if you guys know that legend. Okay, so he says, I can see the she and the fairies, so you won't be able to escape that way. Ah, well then, the leprechaun said, I'll pay you for my freedom. But if you've neither gold, silver, nor copper, how are you going to pay me? With this, the leprechaun wriggled one hand free and pulled a small leather bag off his shoulder. I'll give you this, like it was small. Okay? Sean, with one hand still holding tightly onto the little fellow, took the bag in his free hand. It was a small square leather bag with a strap to go around the shoulder. He opened it, but it was empty inside. However, he didn't refuse the gift just yet. This was the leprechaun's bag, and it might just be magical. What? Oh, so Danae says, yes, I have that fairy in my house. I'm always losing things. I know. I think it also lives in the dryer and steals one sock at a time. By the way, did you guys notice my new grain for St. Patrick's Day and my new little thing I put up there? Okay. So he says, the leprechaun smiled crookedly. Well, now I'll tell you what's so special about this bag. This might just look like a small black bag to you, but this bag grows. You could put a table and 4 chairs in here and still have space for more. The young man looked at the bag again and then back at the leprechaun. You're sure now? He said doubtfully. Sure, I'm sure. And it's a bag that will never wear out or tear, he added. A fine bag altogether, Sean agreed. If what you're telling me is the truth. Well, you'll just have to take my word for it, the leprechaun said. Sean nodded. I suppose I will. And then he suddenly shook open the bag and popped it over the leprechaun's head. Now the bag was so small that it should only have covered his head. But it grew and grew until the small man was completely inside of it. Super fancy. I know. It gets better and better. All right. So here's the leprechaun inside this bag, okay? Do you believe me? Do you believe me now? The leprechaun asked in a muffled voice. Sean stood back and looked at the bag with its wriggling contents. It would be very handy to have a bag like that, he thought. He knelt down and unsnapped the little catches and shook the leprechaun out. I believe you, he said. I'll take the bag in exchange for your freedom. The little man stood up and dusted off his clothes and straightened his cap on his head. Aye, it's a good bag. You better be off now, he said. It's getting late and you don't want to be trapped on the marsh at night. Sean looked up at the sky, which was already beginning to darken in the east. The first of the night stars were beginning to peep through. He shivered as a cold breeze whistled through the lonely trees. No, he agreed. What we really need is someone with a lantern to lead us across these marshes at night. Do you think that's going to come back and bite him in the ass? It might. The leprechaun looked at him strangely for a moment. That we do. He nodded. He gave a short little bow, turned, and he was gone. Sean stood for a moment, wondering if he had been dreaming at all. But he did have the small black bag in his hand as proof. He slung it over his shoulder, pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, and set off as quickly as possible for home. Now, the years had passed. Some years were good for Sean, and he sold and mended a lot of shoes, and he made money enough to live well, but others were very bad, and he was forced to borrow food and money from his friends. Strangely, because Sean was such a good shoemaker, it helped to keep him poor. It took a long time for his shoes to wear out or need mending, and so the people didn't have to go to him as often as they would with an ordinary pair of shoes or boots. There was one very bad winter when he earned practically nothing. The weather was warm and dry. There was a little frost and no snow, and no one needed their boots or shoes mended. And so for 3 whole months, he had no work. Dun, dun, dun. He began to borrow just a little at first, but soon more and more. And in a very short time, he had borrowed a lot of money. He owed a lot of money, okay? And soon those he had borrowed from began to get impatient as spring was approaching and they needed the money to buy crops and seed. But Sean had no money. It was a bright, though cold February morning, and he was sitting on the step outside his little cottage, mending his own shoes, when he saw the stranger approaching. He was a tall, thin, dark man dressed in a black overcoat, black trousers, shiny black shoes, and a black hat. He was smoking a thin black cigar, and the smell of the tobacco was sharp and bitter on the fresh morning air. The stranger stopped at the gate. I'm looking for Sean Lane, he said pleasantly. He spoke Irish with a strange foreign accent. And as he leaned across the gatepost, Sean noticed that he wore black gloves, but with a little gold ring cut outside the glove of his little finger. I'm Sean Lane, the cobbler said, nodding courteously. What can I do for you, sir? The stranger smiled and pushed open the gate. Ah, but it's not what you can do for me. It's what I could do for you, he said. He had a thin sort of smile which curled his lips but didn't brighten his eyes. I'm not sure I understand you, Sean said. The stranger stood before the shoemaker with his hands held behind his back. He was very tall, and Sean had to lean back to look up at him. He has come to my notice that you are, he paused, and smiled again. Well, seems you're a little short of money at present. Ah, no, Sean said quickly, beginning to get nervous now. I owe a few pounds here and there, that's all, but business is picking up. I'll be soon able to pay it all back. He stood up. You know my name, sir, but I'm not sure you told me yours. I didn't, the stranger said, but some people call me himself. Himself? Yes, the tall man smiled again. Have you never heard people say it's himself that's coming now, or it was himself that did this? Sean nodded doubtfully, yeah, okay. It was a common phrase used by the country people, but he had never thought that they were actually talking about a real person. Now himself said, I've come to make a little bargain with you. I'm going to take this banner off of here. I've come to make a bargain with you. What sort of a bargain? Sean asked quickly. A small sort of one. What are you offering me? I'm offering you money, a lot of money, and the promise of a lot of business, as much as you can handle. When I'm finished, you'll be the best known shoemaker in all of Ireland. Uh-oh. What's coming now, guys? Oh, here we are, the kids. I think it's Kabir. Hello. Hi, guys. I'm reading a story. I'm in the middle of it. Okay, and what's it going to cost me? The shoemaker asked doubtfully. Only a promise. What's the promise? Himself leaned forward until his face was only a few inches from Sean's eyes, and his eyes were very red. The promise is that you will come with me in 7 years' time. You won't ask any questions either, he added. Where will I go? The stranger raised one long finger. No questions. He's saying hello again. Sean leaned back against the whitewashed wall of his cottage and thought about it. It was a very tempting offer, a lot of money, and as much business as he could handle. He wasn't too sure about the other part of the deal, though, and he just had a hint of an idea whom the stranger might be. Do you have an idea? Oh, nice story. Exactly. I wish you'd seen the beginning of it. It's a very nice story. He said, can I think about this offer of yours? He asked. The tall man shook his head. This is an offer I make to very few people, and I make it only once. I'm afraid you must make up your mind now. I have a train to catch to Dublin shortly. Of course, that's where he's going. Sean came to a decision. Right then, I'll do it. Himself smiled in a very strange way. Excellent. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a wad of notes and handed it to the shoemaker. Here you are. And I'll make sure you never want for business, he added. The stranger then turned up the collar of his coat, settled his hat on his head. I'll be off now, but I'll see you in 7 years' time, he added, his voice sounding like a warning. He nodded once, and before Sean could say anything else, he turned on his heel and walked away quickly, leaving the shoemaker alone with a handful of money. The 7 years seemed to pass very quickly for Sean Lane. As the stranger had promised, business increased, and he soon became famous as the best shoemaker in all of Ireland. He moved from his little cottage to a bigger house and soon took on some apprentices. He even started seeing a girl from the nearby town. Ooh. And he was just about beginning to think about asking her father for permission to marry her when he realized the 7 years were up. It was a bitterly cold February morning again when the stranger returned. Sean had just hopped out of bed and was splashing cold water in his face when he heard the front doorbell ring. He stopped. It was only 7:30. Who could be calling so early in the morning? He crept to his bedroom, put his ear against the bedroom door, put his ear against it, and listened. Downstairs, one of the young maids hurried to open the door. The shoemaker was the only man in the town who could afford to keep servants. Oh, isn't that fancy? The young girl opened the door and then jumped in fright at the figure who stood at the doorstep. The tall, thin man bowed slightly. Is this Sean Lane's household? He asked, first in Irish and then in English, in a strange, foreign-sounding accent. It is, sir, she answered quietly. And then, is Mr. Lane at home? The man asked with a smile. He is, sir, the maid answered. She stepped back and allowed the stranger to come into the hall. What name shall I give him? She asked. The tall foreigner smiled again. Just say it's himself. The maid hurried upstairs and tapped gently on the shoemaker's door. Sir? Sean hurried around the room getting dressed. 7 years had certainly passed very quickly. Although he had to admit that everything the stranger had promised had come true, which meant that the stranger could only be the devil himself. The shoemaker smiled then. He had partially guessed his identity 7 years ago. He had only accepted his deal because he had an idea how he might cheat the devil. Sean Lane smiled again, picked up his magical leprechaun's bag, and opened the door. What do you think's going to happen? Himself was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. In the 7 years, the stranger hadn't changed in the slightest. He even wore the same clothes he had worn then. Your time is up, he said with a smile. You have to come with me now. Sean nodded. I've been expecting you. My bag is packed, and I've everything here that I need. I don't think you'll eat anything where you're going, himself said with a grin. Where I go, my bag goes with me, Sean insisted. Well, what's in the bag then? The stranger asked. Oh, I couldn't tell you. It's a lot of things. You couldn't fit a lot of things into that bag, himself said in a mocking voice. It holds enough for me, the shoemaker said. Let me see then. No, but it won't hurt to let me see now, will it? Himself asked. Well, Sean shrugged. I suppose it won't. He knelt on the bottom of the step and opened the bag. The stranger knelt down beside him. He peeped in the bag. It's empty, he said. It is not, the shoemaker insisted. Himself pointed. Look for yourself. There's nothing in it. There is, Sean persisted. Look. The stranger leaned over and peered closely into the bag, and Sean quickly pulled it up over his head. The bag grew and grew and grew, and Sean snapped it shut on the tall, thin stranger. Sean danced a little jig at the bottom of the step beside the wriggling bag. I have you now, and you won't get out until you give me back my promise. There was a muffled shout from inside the bag, and it sounded like, no! Sean heaved the long bag up onto his shoulder and set toward the long nearby town. The priest there might be able to help him, he thought. But on his way into town, he passed Farmer O'Neill's barn, where the farmer and his two sons were threshing corn with flails, which were like small whips. A good morning to you, Mr. O'Neill, he said, stopping by the door, resting his bag on the ground by his feet. The farmer and his two sons stopped and nodded to the shoemaker. You're up early this morning, Mr. Lane, the farmer said. Oh, I think today will be a busy day for me, and for you too, I see, he said, pointing to the corn. The farmer nodded. Aye, we have a lot to do. He stopped and pointed to the bag. What have you got there, if you don't mind me asking? A bag full of leather, the shoemaker said. But it's very hard, and I'm taking it to town to get it softened. And how will you get it softened, the farmer asked. Oh, I'll have it beaten for a while. That'll soften it up. Beaten, is it? Well, now give it here. The two lads and myself will beat it for you. Well, that's very kind of you, Sean said, handing the black bag to the farmer. Will we take it out of the bag for you? One of the farmer's sons asked, reaching for the lock. No, Sean said quickly. If you take the leather out of the bag, the flails might mark and tear the surface, he said, saying the first thing that came to his mind. Pretty a good idea, though. Mr. O'Neill nodded. Of course. Well, then we'll just beat the whole lot, bag and all. Stand back now, he warned, and the farmer and his two sons began to beat the bag with all their might. They pounded on it for 1 full hour, and when they were finished, the black bag was soft and limp. The old farmer handed it back to the shoemaker. There you are. I hope that's a little better. It is indeed, Sean said with a grin. Thank you very much for all your trouble. He heaved the bag over his shoulder and, waving the O'Neills goodbye, continued on down the road towards the town. A little further on, Shane came to the Tully brothers' foundry. The 3 Tully brothers were blacksmiths, and when the shoemaker arrived, they were busy making and shaping shoe horses. One was pumping the bellows to blow air into the fire, making the coals glow white hot, and the other 2 were using their heavy hammers to twist the thin bars of metal into half circles, which would then be shaped into the shoes. They stopped when they saw Sean passing and wished him a good morning. Good morning to you, Sean. How are these shoes I made you a while ago, he asked. Oh, Sean said. He asked, how are my shoes? Gerard, the oldest and largest of the 3 brothers, said they fit like a glove. Like a glove. Now remember what I said to you then, if there's anything I can do for you in return. Well, Sean said, there's something. You just name it, Gerard said, rubbing his hands on a thick leather apron and leaning on his hammer. This is a bag full of leather, which I'm taking into town to be softened, Sean said, holding up the black bag. But I was wondering if you could just beat on it for a while, just to help soften it up, you know? Will we not tear the bag, Gerard wondered. Not this bag, Sean promised. It's stronger than it looks. So the 3 Tully brothers took turns to beat the bag with their hammers. Each one hammered on it for an hour, and at the end of 3 hours, they were surprised to find it was still in one piece. That's a fine bag you have there, Gerard said to Sean, handing it back to him. If you'd ever think of selling it, come to me. Oh, I couldn't sell this, Sean said. I've had it for years. It's very special. He thanked the 3 blacksmiths and then waved goodbye. It was now close to mid-morning, and he had one last stop to make before he had a few more words with himself. The shoemaker's final stop was at Devaney's mill on the hill above town. Old Mr. Devaney had been the miller for nearly 40 years. He made all the bread for the town and some for the nearby villages, and his mill was the largest and most famous in the county on account of its huge grinding stones. Sean made his way up the hill and went in through the always open door in the back of the mill where the flour was ground. The old miller saw him and waved. Good morning to you, Mr. Lane. And what brings you up here? Is it freshly baked warm bread you're looking for, eh? How's it going so far? You guys enjoying the story? It's not too much longer. Sean smiled. Devaney's bread was delicious and his favorite. Oh, I'll have some of your bread, Mr. Devaney, but I've come to ask a favor of you. The white-haired old man smiled broadly. Ask away. The shoemaker held up the black bag. Would you put this bag of mine in your mill and let it turn around for a while. But won't that destroy your bag? The old man protested. The shoemaker shook his head. Oh, this is a stronger bag than it looks. Well, if you say so. Mr. Devaney said doubtfully. He took the black bag and put it on the wheel, and then the huge millstone came around and crushed it flat against the second stone. The huge stone rumbled away and then came around again and again and again. Okay? An hour later, Mr. Devaney gave the bag back to Sean. I'm surprised it's not in shreds, he said. I told you it was a special sort of bag, he thanked the old miller and set off for home, munching on a warm loaf of bread. When he returned to his own house, he went out to the barn and set the bag on the ground. He leaned close to it and said, I'll let you out. If our deal is off, I promise. There was a long pause, and the devil said faintly, I promise. Sean opened the bag and shook himself out. Sounds funny. The devil looked very battered and bedraggled, and his fine black clothes were covered with white flour. He got to his feet and shook his fist at the shoemaker. You're a terrible man. I don't think I would want you as a devil. He snapped, and then he closed his eyes, and he disappeared in a crack of blue fire. The shoemaker leaned back and laughed for a long, long time. He had cheated the devil. But the story is not done yet. Sean lived to be a very old man, and he was nearly 90 years old before he died. And of course he went straight to hell, for he had sold his soul to the devil, even if himself wouldn't take it. The door to hell was made from black marble with large silver bolts set into it, and a huge silver knocker in the shape of a dragon's head set in the center of it. Sean took a hold of it and knocked loudly. For a long time, nothing happened, and then slowly, very slowly, the door creaked open, and there was no one there. Yes? A voice suddenly asked, booming and echoing as it came from a great distance. I guess that would be, yes! Well, Sean said, I've just died, and I've ended up here, so I suppose this is where I've got to come. A figure stepped into the doorway. It was the tall, thin, dark-faced man with sharp eyes. Wasn't dressed all in black this time, but Sean recognized him. Ah, it's yourself, he smiled. The devil started and looked closely at the man standing on the doorstep. You! He stepped back and shook his head. You're not coming in here. I remember what you did to me the last time. Where will I go then? Sean asked. You can try the other place, the devil said, and stepping back, he slammed the door shut. Now, at first I thought this was going to be where purgatory came in, but it's not. Sean turned his back on hell and set off along the road of black marble, returning the way he had come. Soon the color of the road changed to gray and then to white, and he soon saw the white marble gate of heaven in the distance. It looked very like the gate of hell, except that this was all white marble with gold bolts and studs, and it had a gold knocker that made in the shape of a smiling angel. That's my face. Sean took a hold of the knocker and gently rapped on the door. The door was opened almost immediately by a tall, thin figure dressed all in white. Sean tried to see over his shoulders, but he couldn't see any signs of wings. Well, the angel asked pleasantly. Well, Sean began, I've just died, and although I had to go to hell, himself won't take me in. Oh, the angel looked very surprised. What's your name? I'll have to check my books. Sean Lane Shoemaker, he said. The angel disappeared for a moment, and when he returned, he was holding a huge leather-bound book with gold clasps on the corners. He opened the book about halfway and ran his long finger down the heavy pages. Lane. Yes, here we are. He read a few lines and they looked down at the shoemaker. Sold your soul to himself, did you? Well, we cannot have you here. But he won't have me down there, Sean protested. What am I to do? The angel considered for a moment, and then he read some more of the shoemaker's life. Finally, he looked up and smiled. Well, I have to send you back, he said. Back? Yes, back down to earth. We'll give you a penance to do. And maybe in a few hundred years, you'll be able to come back in here. Sean nodded. Well, what do I have to do then? The angel tapped the page with his finger. It says here that you once said that there should be someone with the light to lead people across dangerous marshes at night. Did I say that? Sean asked. And then he remembered. It had been that day that he'd been given the black bag by the leprechaun. I remember it now. The angel closed the book with a thump. Well then, that's what you'll do. It is said that Sean wanders this world still. You can see him sometimes as he roams the marshes with his lantern. The country people call his spirit Jack o' the Lantern. Whoa. So it's kind of a fun story that mixes up Leprechaun, St. Patrick's Day, and Halloween. So now you know that story in a more simplified version. And that was just for fun. So thanks for joining me tonight. If you have any questions later, if you would like to hire me to read stories at your parties, I'll do so. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. And thanks for popping in. I've got some YouTube people commenting. Right, that's pretty good. Yeah, so thank you. And Danae, I'm impressed that you were here the whole time. Thank you very much. And like I said, the world's too full of shitty things and people and comments. And so whatever we can do to make it silly or fun or just kind of fun. Will you dress as a leprechaun? Oh, I will. Okay, so next week should be really fun because I'm trying to, Danae, you can help me think of something. Oh, cool. Judy says super fun. Thanks. I'm super impressed that you guys stuck with me because it was like 20 minutes of a story. But next week, I'm going to either do a DIY or cook or a drink recipe or all three, and I'll probably dress like an idiot. Maybe I'll do dollar store finds if they still have St. Patrick's Day decorations. You know how they are. They probably already have Thanksgiving out for next year. But Kelly, yes, they are. Now I don't remember what you're referencing because I just talked about, but thank you. So again, thank you for joining me. I'm loving the comments. If you want to make some more, I'll stick here for a second. This book I found, I'll just tell you, long time ago, and it's got all kinds of cool things in it. I've got poems in here and stuff, and I've just had it for a long time, and I use it in the classroom, and I donated all my books, and I was really upset. Do all four. Okay. I was really upset that I had lost it. And I've been looking for years. I've been wanting to read this. Candor with Katy is coming up on its 4th year, so I'm going to have to start calling it Seasons. Okay? And I was looking for it, and I just found it at the last minute. So I was like, all right, I'm going to read it. So again, I hope you enjoyed it. I love you guys. I love your socks. You're amazing. I will see you next week. If you still want to comment, I'll comment later. Okay? I promise. Peace and love.